Good morning, everybody. We welcome you so much. Thank you so much for joining us. Hashtag Christian Straight Talk. Simon and myself, and we've got a good brother with us this morning. He's really good. He's really, really good. We won't big him up too much yet, but let's just get straight into this. We thank you for your lives wherever you are. Thank you for the thousands of downloads across the globe for these podcasts, whether it's through Hashtag Christian Straight Talk or whether it's through the Ealing platform that we push through, and whatever and however it may be. We just want to say thank you so much to everybody. It is January, the 4th of Jan, Thursday here, and wherever you're capturing this recording, we pray that God will bless you. Never give up hope. There's always a way forward. But it's Hashtag Christian Straight Talk. We've got Simon with us as always, my partner in crime. I don't know if that's the right word to use. Hello, Simon.
It's great to be back, and it's great to have Brian with us again.
And who is this man?
Yeah.
Who is he?
And Ben, Brian's, the podcast we've done with Brian and some of the ones that you've done, they're getting a lot of downloads. They're getting a lot of attention, aren't they? So people want to know,
traction,
Brian, about what's going on and what's going on around the world. And the situation is right now is that I guess a lot of people have, put the Israeli situation on the back burner because of Christmas, isn't it?
True, very true, very true.
Yeah, let's push it over.
But it's still there. It's happening all the way through.
Happening.
Yeah, it's all happening, yeah.
It's happening all the way through. And for those out there that have never heard Brian before, this is our good brother, Reverend Brian Greenaway from Maoz Israel. And there is a great website that he's got his face splashed all over. I'm only joking. When you look at this website, it's loaded. Maoz is a beautiful ministry to follow, maozisrael.org. All the information, everything you need to know, very front line, real out on the coal face of ministry, doing amazing things for the voice of God. And we do, as Simon has just said, we welcome our good brother Brian from this local ministry, not too far from where we are. Brian's been part of Ealing for a long, long time. He's an AOG minister, and we love him from the very bottom of our heart. Brian, hello.
Good to be with you. Thank you. That's a long introduction.
That was.
Can you follow that?
It's Ben we're talking about.
I've got many words.
No, it really is good to be with you again. It really is.
Brian, what's happening? What's going on? Where's this all going? What is going on?
Yeah, you're right, actually, that even wars go onto the back burner in people's lives, don't they?
They do.
What's the latest news? Oh, there's, suddenly, the war in Israel was headlines. Now there's probably a soap star in a scandal.
Yeah, definitely.
That's the headline for the UK. But it's tragic that people forget these things, isn't it?
Well, across the world, Brian, at this time, we've got the Epstein revelations, haven't we? Who went to Epstein Island. And so, all of a sudden, spotlight's on something else, isn't it? But the struggle still goes on, doesn't it?
Yeah. And as believers in Jesus, we have to realise that there is a lot of things that do distract us, and what's important.
It's so true, isn't it?
And there's wars all over the world. The Ukraine war continues, and that has strategic, geopolitical, and biblical ramifications. But actually, the war in Israel is about what's going on, and it's biblical things, isn't it? It's about
I think that's what's really important.
Yeah, it is. That's what's really important. And for us to understand what's happening in the world, we have to look at Israel. David Paulson always used to say that, didn't he? You need to look in the church, you need to look in the world, and you need to look at Israel. And they're the three areas whereby you find out what's happening and you stay awake. Sadly,
that's right. You're sharp, aren't you? Yeah. You need to be like the watchman on the wall. You need to be alert of what's going on in them three areas that you're talking about. Yeah, there's wars happening all over the place. But what I actually believe is what we are seeing through the voice of Israel and everything that's going on there, this is very deep in biblical truths. That's what I believe where we're sitting at. I believe that this is like one of the major signs of the end to come. I actually believe that we are in serious positions spiritually, globally, and as you said, using Israel as a clock, as a calendar.
Yes, yeah,
it's critical to look at what does the scriptures say, what does God say, what is Israel saying, what is the political agenda, what is it all about? What's going to happen?
Well, it's interesting to see, Brian, how countries are positioning themselves.
Yes.
Some giving lip service, some actually taking some action. And it'd be interesting to know from you just how the war against the terrorist mass organisation is progressing. But also there's other fronts as well, isn't there? There's did Israel attack Lebanon, Beirut, the other day?
They did, yeah. So they assassinated the deputy leader of. They call it political Hamas. There is no difference. Hamas is Hamas. They say, it's just political Hamas. Well, it's the same organisation. So they did. It appeared that they used a drone to kill the deputy leader. But Israel did say at the beginning of this whole situation, a bit like they have when they've hunted down Nazis, they've said, we will get you wherever you are. What country you're in, we're going to get you. And that's what they're doing. They're taking out the leader. These organisations are very top-heavy. A lot of people, there's a lot of misinformation amongst those who support Hamas, those who even work for Hamas. But we realise if they can take the top off of it, cut the head off, you can cause a lot of disorganisation in it. So that's what they'll do. And that they've taken this guy out, the deputy leader of Hamas's political bureau, and Hezbollah are not very happy. And they said, there'll be ramifications, but they always say that anyway. They are targeting leaders. That's what's happened in the last few days.
Quite interesting what you said there, Brian, about cutting the head off, as in like the organisation. It's the same as David and Goliath, isn't it?
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
When you look at that, there was change when David actually killed him, and he used the sword that he brought to him. What the enemy, meant for harm, God will turn for good. There's so much to look at spiritually and practically that it runs very close together, doesn't it? Yeah. That you deal with the top, and the rest will fall.
Yeah. Well, it happens in dictatorial regimes, doesn't it? So
yes.
People will have heard in the last few days before we're speaking of the bomb attack in Iran. So Soleimani's tomb, there was a memorial there because he was killed. He was the head of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, killed when Trump was president, ordered him killed. Iran was very angry about that. Always wanted to take revenge, yet in the last few days, there's been a bomb explosion which appears to have killed nearly 200 people at his tomb where they were doing a commemoration. Wow. Iran have blamed Israel. Israel wouldn't have any need to do that. So it appears to be a Shia-Sunni thing. But my point is, of course, is that America realised that killing the leader of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard would impact Iran's ambitions. So killing these leaders is something that is a strategy that nations will take. Definitely.
And that, again, see that in the Old Testament, didn't you?
Yeah.
The kings were taken out.
Oh, yes, yeah.
And then the fall of the nation. And so you take the leader out and you see the rest fall. It's critical, isn't it? David and Goliath again, and so many other different places.
That's right, I mean, Iran, we think of them as the big bad Iran, but we know the majority of Iranians don't support that regime. They don't.
Of course they don't.
In a strict Islamic regime, and there's terrorists. There's also many believers in Jesus who don't want
many
to
Christians,
be.
And come into faith as well.
That's right. Yeah. They don't want an Islamic regime, and I think the whole world is hoping the thing will collapse. Because if it did, give people freedom, wouldn't it? That's what it really need.
Wow. That's right.
Yeah, that's that whole Iran situation. How the Ayatollahs came to power. That's another story entirely. You could, that's a rabbit hole that we probably don't want to go down this one. But how are things in Gaza? Is Israel making really good headway down there? Are they really clearing out the terrorists? Right?
Yeah. So the north has been the first area of the campaign, and about 3 or 4 weeks ago they destroyed what is locally called the Wasp Nest. Now, this was the Hamas base, which was a city with a city underneath.
Oh, wow.
Which had been completely evacuated. They had to fight their way through to the city. So they just blew the whole thing up. I mean, I've seen a video of the massive explosion. Of course, there was nobody there unless there were terrorists hiding in the tunnels. So that's good because they dismantled Hamas's infrastructure in the north. But, of course, that's not the only place. The tunnels are all over Gaza, right down to Khan Yunis. So there's fighting now in the streets. Israel have allowed a lot of soldiers to come home because they're having a more concentrated effort on what they're doing in their campaign. Some say that, America, their ally, has actually restricted and caused more Israeli deaths because 174 soldiers have died now. 1/5 of those have been through friendly fire, killed by their own artillery, shot by each other. There's lots of fatigue amongst the soldiers. Obviously, they've been fighting a long time. Yeah. But also the fact that Hamas use human shields called civilians, so they're trying to get behind the human shields to fight Hamas. And because America have told them to be careful, they're being very careful. So they're not, there's less weaponry being used to nullify the terrorists before the troops go in. So they're losing troops in that respect as well. So so the campaign is changing.
It's it's a political hot potato, and the Americans are trying to keep both sides of the, aren't they? And if we went down that route, all the restrictions that were on Iran have been taken away by Biden and his cronies, and so. Well, on the face of it, it looks like they're doing a job for Israel. Beneath the scenes, they're trying to because a lot of these. When you look back, a lot of these people that he's got in his administration, that Blinken and people like that, they politically were aligned with Obama and who was a big Iran supporter, because they wanted to strengthen Iran at one time. So I can see, but they're having their own troubles, because they're getting a lot of attacks. The Americans, aren't they, on their ships and on their bases?
True, yeah. And it's expensive because the Houthi. So the Houthis are firing missiles from the Yemen, and these missiles cost around about £10,000 each. But the American missiles that are used to shoot them down cost something like $1.2 million each. So, it's really expensive to shoot a missile down. So I think that what they're saying is we've got to do something more strategic. We've got to stop them being fired in the first place.
Yeah. And someone's rubbing their hands, aren't they? Someone's making a lot of money.
With shares in arms companies, are making money out of it.
They love a war, don't they?
They do, Brian? I mean, sometimes you see these action films. Oh, what was behind it was the arms dealer because he was making money. I thought there's a certain amount of truth in that.
All that truth in that, yeah. And, you got back right to the Vietnam War where Kennedy didn't want the war, and as soon as he was assassinated, LBJ said, we're sending troops in, and the old
purse started to ring. The old coins started to roll in.
It comes down
there's so many different agendas, isn't there? There's so many different hidden agendas within everything, with war, with what's happening in Israel, and we have to seek God and say, God, what are you saying?
And I think you was
what
right,
are you saying?
We've got to keep our heads on a swivel, haven't we?
You've got to look at everything, like Brian said.
And Brian, coming back to Gaza, Brian, some of them tunnels were huge, weren't they?
Unbelievable.
Drive vehicles through them. Yeah,
they're amazing, weren't they?
Extensive, yeah.
And they've allowed this to happen.
Yeah. They've destroyed the network under the Al Shifa hospital now. They did it without damaging the hospital, because if there's loads of tunnels under something, you blow them up, what's above comes down. So very good engineering. They've managed to destroy that whole network, and the hospital is still intact, which is good. But Gaza has a lot of hospitals anyway. It has more hospitals on average than most other nations. All about the hospitals, but they've got a lot. There's a lot of UN hospitals there. There's other hospitals, and that. So it's quite funny that the view you give. Because somebody said to me the other day, "Oh, I saw a video of them all in the market shopping." I said, "Yeah, it's still happening. People are shopping in Gaza.
People are still walking and working.
Yeah, there are refugees. That is true in the south, but it is still ongoing. The operation has been very precise. Israel trying to work around the civilian population where they are there.
It's absolutely unbelievable what is going on. And you're talking about the tunnels, and straight away I think, how did they ever start that construction? Where did they take the earth? Where did they dump everything? Where did they get the money? Where did they get the manpower?
The money is obviously it's come from Iran, or come from money that was going to the Gazans for their benefit.
So when you look,
EU,
when you look at everything, every hand has been involved in something somewhere. So when you can't really point the finger at one, because when you point the finger at one, yes, we know it's Hamas, but actually where did they get their money? Where did they get their equipment? Where did they get this? Where did they get that? Who fueled it? Who funded it? What is going on behind closed doors?
Well, it's interesting, Ben, isn't it? Because, Brian, do you think a lot of stuff's been exposed now that was behind a curtain before?
I think he has always been there. I think Simon, like you were saying, sometimes governments, and it goes back in history, governments want to compromise, don't they? Like the whole thing with the British Mandate, we go back nearly 100 years of when the British sort of abandoned Israel, and, they had the deals with the Arab nations. Oil was becoming more important right through the Second World War. They didn't want to upset the Arabs. They had made a promise to the Jewish people. So in the end, what did they do? We made a mess of it. The UK made a mess of it. They just walked away from it and left a mess. And I think that's happening now. They see, the European nations want to give money to help Gaza. They want to help the Palestinians, but actually the money's getting into Hamas hands. It's being used for arms. It's being used for tunnels. It's a real, it's a mess, isn't it? It really is.
There is so much misinformation out there, isn't there, Brian? There's so much about all these thousands of Gazans, the Palestinians that have been killed. But the way I understand it, it's probably 2 Palestinians for every 1 Israeli been killed.
It is, yeah.
So it's not
very low.
Massive numbers.
They've done very, very well. Yeah. If you look at, I think I've mentioned before, if we looked into the statistics about wars, since the Second World War, it's been one of the most humane wars in the sense of the number of civilians killed to military operatives. And yeah, the numbers, the funny thing is we would never, when we had the war against ISIS, I'm sure that the BBC and other journalists would not have quoted ISIS figures. But you see on the news saying, Hamas authorities say that X many people have been killed. I think these people are liars and terrorists.
They're liars. Can't believe
why are we listening
Why are
to
you giving them airplay on figures alone?
Because Israel says that they think they've killed around 8,000 terrorists.
Wow,
so far.
that's a lot. That's a lot of manpower alone.
Do you know, Brian?
8,000.
But obviously they're springing up. But the vision would be to clear this lot out and then build up another ideology, wouldn't it? Similar to the one that where the Abraham Accord was being spoken about, because it's just it's indoctrinated, isn't it?
It is, from a young age, yeah. And even this yesterday, the Israeli government released more, and we know about the videos, that from a young age teaching children to hate Jews. God. And there's a well-known one actually. It's a Mickey Mouse type character, a Mickey Mouse rip-off that's done by in UN schools in Gaza, where this Mickey Mouse character is like being beaten up and is eventually killed by an Israeli Secret Service person. And I mean, it's crazy. This is a kindergarten program for 6 to 7 year olds, teaching that Jews are evil and they should be killed. And they're all saying, I want to be a martyr for Hamas when I grow up. And then the videos they released yesterday of some of the schools where they take young kids, like every kids go to kids camp.
Of course.
And of course they do drawing and they do colouring and then they have fun and they do trekking. But actually these Hamas-led ones, they learn how to hold a Kalashnikov and about explosives and how to kill people. And that's when you teach kids from a young age, that sort of stuff, it's not the kid's fault.
It's been normalised.
It's been normalised to hate Jews and to say, we're freedom fighters, we've got to kill Jews and be martyrs. If you teach kids that, they'll grow up like that.
That's exactly completely on point. So it's not the children, it's the way they've been brought up, and the scripture says bring a child up in the way that he should go. And what we are clearly needing here is to really focus on God like never before and look at everything and bring everything to prayer, bring everything to God and say, God, we need miracles, because when you start teaching, it's the same in this nation, isn't it? The children have grown up with a certain way that a certain gender is okay. They don't know no different.
But it's also the same in the colleges and universities of the West, where there's been this anti-Semitic teaching drive all the way through from years. So it's like the frog in the boiling water, isn't it? And that's the whole situation, isn't it? That there's been this indoctrination of from lecturers, from all the way through to students, where the people all of a sudden are looking at these Hamas terrorists as freedom fighters, and people are calling for freedom for Palestine, which is completely wrong and contrary. And what we've done in this world, Brian, is that more and more we're pushing God out. We're pushing God out. God's come out of governments. God's come out of everything. And when you've got a vacuum, then it'll be filled with evil, won't it?
Yeah, it will be.
This is what's happening. This is what's happening.
I mean, like you say, Ben, we need prayer, don't we? Because how do you? It's almost like after the Second World War, the denazification of young people had to be carried out in Germany, because they'd been taught, obviously, by the National Socialist system right through the 30s, these things that weren't true. about the Aryan race and everything. So that had to be dealt with. And that's a similar thing now, isn't it? What is the answer afterwards? And plenty of people are talking about that. Even Tony Blair's name came up, didn't it? But he's denied it, that he was going to be part of resettling Palestinians in Europe. And he has said, that's a lie, I'm not doing that.
Yeah, I think we should steer clear of Tony
name.
Blair wherever he services said, you know, because he had great, he made a great decision to bring us into the Iraq War, didn't he, Jim?
Goodness gracious me.
But amongst all this, so we've had, Brian, we've had Christians fighting with the IDF, haven't we? And part of the IDF. And one guy died, a German Christian, Uriah Bayer, didn't he?
Yes,
and
he
was a sergeant major, wasn't he? And he was a Christian, fighting. Didn't have an Israeli passport. Ben didn't have. No, he was just
went and stood with them.
He was a member of the IDF.
That's right. Died from head injuries, sadly, but 2 weeks ago now, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Tragic. Yeah, it was.
And then there was a great outpouring for him. You know.
They recognise him, a righteous among the nations. A Gentile stood up for Jewish people when they're under pressure.
What a story!
And I think that's where we got to be from our own standpoint, didn't it? You know, sort of.
Are we going to now? He made a physical stand. See, it wasn't just lip service. It was actual action that he put his life on the line, and he lost his line for the biblical Israel, what he believed in.
Yeah, he did.
And then you look at the UK church. The church in the UK is so generally quiet about Israel. It won't even talk about it. Let alone stand with it. Its voice and no action is telling, or no voice is telling us where the actual, you say the church within the UK, where it actually sits and what it actually believes in, which is far from the biblical Israel because of where is the church? You can't help but not have this conversation. Where are these denominational leaders shouting and jumping about, we're going to stand? Now, you just mentioned that single guy alone believed in his own faith, took himself there, put himself on the front line for what he believed in, lost his life. Where's the UK church?
Yeah, I mean, we're not obviously saying that churches should take up arms. And
no, we're not saying that.
Sense, but actually, I think that the church needs to re-examine, doesn't it, what it believes about Israel, and to realise that, Israel is not perfect, and they're not in any sort of state following God. It's a nation still in rebellion in general, people against God. But then again, there are promises there. There are promises upon Israel for who they are, the called nation, the people of God. And so recognising that if you stand against that, if you condemn that nation, then you're putting yourself in a very dangerous position, because Scripture tells you that they are the apple of God's eye, even in their imperfect state.
And what you said about, it's not about lifting up a weapon. It's about recognising, standing in prayer and worship. But the UK church is voiceless.
It is,
That is more dangerous than anything, because when you get unity where two or three agree, there is power. So as you're saying, and we know, we're not saying for the UK church to pick up weaponry, but literally to stand and say we are standing biblically, fundamentally with the God of Israel. And it's quiet, isn't it?
Well, if they can make statements about same-sex marriages, though, Ben.
Oh, you can do that. You're allowed to do that.
So can the Pope. I mean, he's come out and
some
given
classics.
it large, and but you know, it's right. Brian, it's exactly right. You come against Israel and the nation of Israel at your peril. Believe
That's correct.
You know what you know. We'll just see, because God will pass judgment on that.
He will.
You know, and Brian, has it unified Israel? This war.
Yeah, it definitely has. Yeah, all the problems we had with the judicial review, I think, what was going with the new law that was coming in, which has in fact been struck down just the other couple of days ago.
I was going to ask you about that.
The High Court
that's been
kicked it back to the government and said we're not going to pass it, and their government are very upset about that. But it has brought obviously a unity, the whole nation together, and people, you know, our friends and colleagues in Maoz and other people we know have said they've never seen the nation so unified
as
they do now. not only the soldiers fighting, but all the civilians, like a massive civilian army, supplying food,
Backup.
cooking for people, running supplies, helping people, taking people into their homes. It's brought an incredible unity to the nation, which is a good thing. It's a good thing, It's,
and it'd be interesting, Brian. So obviously we've got Hamas terrorists and not just Hamas, but all the other PLO, all the other organisations that are bringing children up to hate Israel. But it's not a similar situation in Israel, is it? The children are not brought up to hate the Palestinians.
No. I mean, Israel is really the freest country in the Middle East, and Israelis are generally very opinionated. Every single Israeli thinks that they can be the prime minister and run the national football team at the same time, better than the people are doing now. Israelis are very outspoken. And here's an interesting thing. So the majority of the journalists that cover the Middle East for most of the major television, print, radio outlets are based in Jerusalem. They don't want to live in Tehran. They don't want to live in Beirut. They don't even want to live in Amman, in Jordan or Egypt. They like to live in Jerusalem because it's a nice place to live. So they report the Middle East news from there. So I know I can give one example, name one of a big political journal who covers the Middle East editor, lives in Jerusalem. Or Tel Aviv, lives in Tel Aviv, because that's the place to live. It's much nicer to live there than it is to live in any nation in the Middle East. They may travel to these other nations. Now, of course, when they rub shoulders with the average Israeli, they moan about the government. They say, Bibi Netanyahu is not doing this, or the previous prime minister didn't do that. So they hear all the bad stuff about Israel from Israel, like we do in Britain. We moan about the government all the time. So they hear Israelis bad mouthing the government sometimes. Oh, we don't like this, we don't like that. They get the street politics, and they hear that all the time, which they report back. Oh, Israel's disunified. Israel's this, Israel's that. What they don't get is the average Joe Blogs on the street of Cairo or Oman or Iraq and those nations, where one is there's no freedom of the press. Of course, people won't speak openly to the press. They won't say, if you go to Beirut, you won't get the average man who lives in Beirut saying, "Oh, Hezbollah, they're killing people, etc., etc." Isn't the government terrible? Because they themselves might get killed for saying that. So, you see, what's happening is that the journalists are just hearing the street vibe from Israel, but they don't hear from the common people of these other nations.
Yeah, very
and that sort of makes sense.
Yeah.
But it's on that sort of micro level. That's what's happening, is that journalists live in Israel and they see all the bad parts of it as well as the good.
Very true, isn't it? So true.
Why do they live there?
But why do they live there? Yeah,
because it's the only free country. It's the country that has freedom.
You was talking, sorry, Simon, someone mentioned back earlier on about coming away from Israel and how important it is to bless and to stand with Israel. We mentioned like 100 years ago. Can we backtrack a little bit when you mentioned about 100 years ago? What happened about 100 years ago with this UK government? What actually was that situation? Because I actually believe that is when the downfall of this nation actually started. So what was that point?
Yeah, so during the First World War, just going over quickly, the British government was given the mandate for Palestine, and people have heard of the Balfour Declaration in 1917 that said that the British government agreed with the idea of a Jewish nation, or a place being founded for Jewish people in Israel, back in their homeland. So the outcome from the First World War was that with the San Remo sort of meetings in 1920, is that the nations of the world, the League of Nations, that would become the United Nations, agreed that certain European nations generally would be given the mandate for an area. Now, the French were in Lebanon, and Britain was given what is sort of Transjordan area. So that's where Israel is today, where Jordan is, and they would look after that area, militarily, politically, while it was being agreed what would happen in that nation. So, yes, Britain managed that. They did a pretty bad job. They made promises to the Jewish people following the Balfour Declaration, but they also made promises to the Arab people. So they promised, they contradicted the two promises. And of course, the background of that is to do with Lawrence Arabia, T.E. Lawrence and people like that. They wanted the Arab nation to fight against the Ottoman Empire in the First World War. You know, the big Ottoman Empire
Sure.
that had
Yeah,
ruled that
yeah,
whole area
yeah.
for 500 years. They needed the Arab tribes on their side. And so they made promises to the Arabs, said, if you fight against the Turks with us, the Ottomans, then, you know, we'll give you all this land. So they made a promise that they shouldn't have made because they'd already made a promise to the Jewish people they would have their land. So they tried to administer it. They did it very badly. There were massacres against Jewish people by Arabs in the 20s and into the 30s. Then along came the Second World War. Everybody was distracted by that. And just after the Second World War, the British realised they'd made a real mess of it. They sort of said, well, you can have this bit to the Jewish people. You can have this bit. The Jewish people said, fine. The Arabs that were there said, we don't want that. We want it all. So the British said, we had enough of this. We're pulling out. The post-war government was to a certain degree anti-Semitic. The British government, the Labour government at that time was anti-Semitic. We knew that some of the politicians were as well. So they abandoned the Jewish people. And in fact, they gave a right of return to people who believed in Jesus and other Jewish people from Israel. They said, you can come and live in Britain. And quite a few did at that time, because the British were convinced that the Arabs would wipe these
Really?
people into the sea. You've heard this before, haven't we? River to the sea.
Right. Yeah.
And 5 Arab nations, many trained by British troops like the Jordanian army. And these were just the ragtag people who'd come out of concentration camps and been expelled from Muslim nations in the Middle East. Now, there was nowhere they had an organised army, the Jews. But of course they won in 1948. But the British abandoned them, really. That's what they did. They just said they abandoned Jewish people to their fate.
Isn't that crazy? And they just, you know, Hitler tried to exterminate them. And then, you know, the other side just give them over.
Yeah, it did, yeah.
And so did they give big swathes of land to Jordan?
They did, yeah. That was the thing. You know, Jordan, as we know Jordan now, Transjordan as it was called then, had a lot more land than the Jewish people. All of the Arab people could have gone to live there. They had a lot more percentage of land, and the Jordan, as we know now, is a much bigger area. But still, they wouldn't have this peace treaty where the Jewish people were allowed any land whatsoever. And, you know, it's a terrible state of affairs. And one aspect that people seem to forget is that over 800,000 Jews from about 48 through to the early 50s were kicked out of Libya and Lebanon and Iraq. And not Iran straight away. Iran were an ally of Israel at the time. If we get to Egypt, we've got Syria, we've got all these North African nations, all the Muslim nations, kicked their Jewish populations out, the Yemen. So you saw 800,000 Jews, Middle Eastern Jews, Sephardic Jews we call them, coming from those nations to form the nation of Israel. All refugees. They're not refugees anymore. They settled down. They said, let's build a nation. And that's, you know, the core of modern Israel. Are Middle Eastern Jews that were thrown out of Islamic nation. Nobody mentions that.
Nobody mentions that, no.
They mention the
right.
Palestinian refugees, but they never mention the Jewish refugees.
So there we go. So in 1917, that is when the treaty, the Balfour Treaty,
Balfour Declaration, was
Balfour
made.
Declaration was made, and that's when the British government started to backpedal from its promises.
Yeah, they were right at first, straight away.
Yeah,
when
yeah.
you got into the 20s and into the 30s, then they began to make a real mess of it. And so many Jewish people, I mean, it's a long time ago now, that's true, do not have fond memories of the Brits. And some Israeli dramas that I watch, they're quite funny because they portray the British as, you know, stuffy and posh-speaking, arrogant, who don't care about Jewish people.
And do you know what? Isn't it crazy? Because, you know, the richest man in the world, Rothschild, that's a Jewish name. And also, we've had a Jewish Prime Minister, Disraeli, as well. So, and yet there's this undercurrent of anti-Semitism.
It's always been there.
Always been there, isn't it? You know, the wandering Jew. You know,
that's right. It is. Well, in the 30s, it was very prevalent. So if you went to a dinner party, if you and I, us three of us were like a bit posh and we were in the landed classes in the 1930s, if you went to a dinner party and anti-Semitism would be open. People would talk down about Jews. They would talk about them running the world and all stuff. It would be quite common, and no one would bat an eyelid, even if there were Jewish people there. That's how they view it. Now, of course, the Second World War changed that. What Hitler did, and the actions of the British fascist movement under Mosley, and that did change the view of that. And people began to say, actually, no, this isn't right. Particularly after the Mosley's bully boys. I mean, he had Edward. Mosley, I've heard of Baronet Mosley, head of the fascist movement. He had this big rally at Olympia.
Black shirts.
Black shirt rally, that's right, And when there were dissenters, the the black shirt bully boys beat them up, and people saw that happen. And there were many MPs and members of the landed classes at that rally, and they said, hang on a minute, we're pulling back from this. We don't want to be part of this. It was around the night of the long knives and all that sort of stuff happening in Germany. So the British generally, publicly, began to pull back from fascism, which was a good thing. But there is still that underlying anti-Semitism we see in political circles, rising up in our universities. We thought it went away, but it's rising up again.
Oh, it's powerful. I mean... And it's difficult to put your finger on exactly why that is, isn't it? I mean, certainly Jewish businessmen have been very successful throughout the world, haven't they? And you're quite right. There was always that glass ceiling. No matter how much money they had, they weren't going to break through into the landed gentry of
That's right.
of the UK. Very interesting. And I know it's slightly off track, but when they formed that the nation of Israel, of course they were still under attack, weren't they?
Yes.
And Egypt, they had a big row with Egypt, didn't they? They had the 100-day war, was it? It was a 6-day war then.
Yeah, 6-day war.
And
Yom Kippur War, yeah.
In fact, when I joined the police in 1976, and there was a guy there, ex... Rappaport, his name was, and he was ex-Israeli military. And I said to him, well, how did you... He was part of that 6-day. I said, how did you... He said, well, we only had a small army, he said, but they kept us awake with drugs. They kept us awake with drugs. So we only had one army, and whilst the Egypt armies had to swap, and we just beat them. We just beat them. And so no matter what has come against... I mean, Syria came against them, and... One tank, I think, defeated the whole...
It was miraculous, yeah.
It
was miraculous how...
It is a miracle. Yeah. I think listening to what you're just saying and just really drawing into the scripture, and we were just saying, like, where has this really come from, this anti-Semitic thing that's been an undercurrent for so long? I can't help but go back to the Word of God, and when Jesus just simply said, as they persecuted me, so will they persecute you. So all the way through, there is nothing new under the sun, is it? We've just got different labels on the tin. Yeah. But when you break it down to the core, it really is persecution.
Yeah. It is. You can look at the spiritual aspect.
Yes.
There are two kingdoms in this.
There
world,
are two kingdoms. There's the kingdom
of God, and there's the kingdom of darkness. And that's exactly what the thing is here.
And really is.
You can't... You said it earlier, Brian, you can't get away, and Ben's alluded to it, you can't get away from the fact that the Jewish nation are God's people. Yeah, they're God's people, and you come against God's people at your peril. You really do. And so, Christ came from the Jewish nation. He's going to come back to the Jewish nation as well, isn't he? Do you know? And what biblically, the final battle is going to take place. We know who's going to win. Do you know? So.
That's right.
Who's that?
Oh, thank goodness we're on the winning side there. But obviously there's a lot to... There's a lot that's got to go on before that. But it just makes it very interesting to see who's circling around.
Yeah.
And some of these other nations, like Saudi Arabia, who want to become more aligned with the West, because they want... you're seeing adverts now for Saudi tourism on the TV. They've made themselves the capital of. They're going to make themselves the capital of the world sport.
Yeah, they are. Yeah,
all the boxing now is taking place in Saudi. All the big fights are in Saudi. All sorts of stuff is going on. They want to be the World Cup. They've had a World Cup in Qatar, haven't they? So these nations are backing away from the more virulent. But they're not Arab, are they? It's Muslim.
No, Muslim extremism.
There's a bit of a mix, isn't there?
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
So it's very interesting to see where the land lies and politically where it's all going.
Yeah.
I think as believers, you need to, people are upset about what's happening in Gaza. That's true. They do see that. But then sometimes we forget what our responsibility is, isn't it? So our responsibility as believers is the gospel. That's got to be at the front.
That's number one.
And to pray, isn't it? We wrestle not against flesh and blood. Our weapons of warfare are not, So people know the scriptures. And God will deal with Israel if they do things wrong, because he's told them that, hasn't he?
And we've seen that, haven't we?
We need to step back to and say, okay, so Israel do this wrong. So last week they a legal ruling made same-sex adoption legal in Israel. Okay, now we know that's anti-biblical, but God will deal with that. God will deal with his people and his nation. It's not for the nations of the world to come and punish Israel. In fact, they will be punished for coming against Israel. So what we need to realize as believers is there might be things about Israel we don't like in your audience, but actually God said he will do it. If they're not good to the stranger, there is the prophet said this is what will happen. If they're unjust in their nation to the young and the widow, then God will deal with them, and he will sort them things out.
Brian, that's so reassuring, isn't
it? It's really
reassuring.
It is. Yeah.
And as you said, Tel Aviv was the gay capital of the world,
That's
wasn't
right,
it? So
yeah.
God will deal with it.
He will.
And any nation that comes against, God will deal with that too.
He will do, yeah.
Comes back to the Bible, doesn't it? It comes back. It always circles the centre, the point. You can't leave it. It's scripture. It's so true. And it's learning, isn't it, as well as individuals, to leave it at the cross and leave it with Jesus. And don't get involved to a degree of political. It's like, what does the Bible say? What is God saying?
Sure.
But because man has pushed God and the Bible out, they're not. They're not.
Yeah.
It's irrelevant to them.
Yeah.
What is more relevant is the
monetary,
monetary standpoint,
everything,
all that sort of stuff. So. I don't know, Brian, as we come into land, we had a good old 40-odd minutes.
God, we've had a good stretch. It's been very good.
As we come into land, Brian, you want to leave us with something for the moment? What, if we've got believers out there who want to pray for Israel, just, maybe give them a prayer to finish off with.
Yeah.
Well, Brian, before you say anything, just something on Iran, just for something really quickly. Sure. I've just quickly gone into the persecuted church, and I just want to let you know that nation, Iran, there's only 1.2 million Christians in a population of 86 million.
Right.
Well, that's what you know, isn't it?
I'm on Open Doors. I'm on the persecuted church. I'm looking at what it's saying. But when you actually look at that, the persecuted church, we're talking about persecution, the real church of Jesus Christ, the underground church, the persecuted church, is so powerfully moving, isn't it?
And what does it say about the end times, Ben? It says about the end times when the river Euphrates dries up. It's in Revelation.
It's in there, isn't it?
And Euphrates is drying.
It's drying up.
Something prophetic about that, isn't there? Definitely.
There really is. There you go, Brian.
Okay, so finally,
my brother.
Psalm 2. I think Psalm 2 is the one, isn't it, that I go back to? It says, "Why do the nations rage and the people plot vain things? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us break their bonds in pieces and cast their cords from us." I think this is really funny because in verse 4 it says, "He who sits in the heavens shall laugh.
Yeah.
The Lord shall hold them in derision. And so, we see in Psalm 2, don't we, that whatever the nations plot, the kings and the leaders, that God thinks it's funny.
He does, and just pondering on that, innit?
Why did they?
Yeah,
that's it.
Why do the nations rage?
And that's that old joke, innit? How do you make God laugh? Well, you tell him your plans.
That's right.
That's it.
That's right.
So
there we go. We got it.
That is the truth. Yeah,
Brian,
God bless you, Brian. It's been an amazing time, and
thank you.
Thank you for your insight. It's really, really. Very, very good. Yeah.
It's very sobering, isn't it? And it's really quiet here thinking about everything that's going on. We thank you, Simon. Thank you, Brian. Everybody that's listening around the world, may God bless you and strengthen you in the mighty name of Jesus Christ. We'll catch you soon. #Christian Straight Talk. We love you from the very depth of our heart. Have a great day wherever you are. Please share all this stuff out, and follow Jesus. That is the key. God bless. See you later. Bye-bye.